Hello, welcome to Mental Health Hour. I am Dr. TAPO. I hope your week has been going well so far, wherever you are in the world. Um, there's been some flooding locally, lots of rain, thunderstorms. It feels more like late October rather than August here in Ontario. So I don't know if that means our summer is over or what's going on, but the weather has not been kind this, I'll say, last week or so. I hope wherever you are, you and yours are doing well. We've been talking about suicide, suicidal ideation, self harm, and today we'll be switching a little bit into another topic. But before I go on, just a reminder that this show is for education, awareness, information, gathering, sharing, knowledge translation, whatever we want to call it. It does not replace professional help with a qualified practitioner, a qualified physician, a qualified therapist within your region, province, town, village, wherever you might be listening from. So I am grateful that you're here, you're listening. You can get in touch with us. You can email infolovebay@gmail.com, infolovebay@gmail.com. I've been doing this show for several years. I still can never remember the number off the top of my head. It's terrible. But you can also text us on 437 778 3299, 437 778 3299, and it's such an easy number to remember, actually. Infolovebay@gmail.com. You can email us or text 437 778 3299. Would love to hear from you. Would love to know how you have been coping, how you've been growing, what you've been doing to take care of yourself and your loved ones, what's been going on for you. Call us, text us, email us, share your story, share your inspiration, ask your questions. The questions are really, really good because they help us to continue learning and sharing as communities around the globe. Today, I have one email that I'm going to share. I'm not sure where this person is writing from, but they were listening to our program on suicide and they wrote in to say, "Your program on suicide resonates with me. My first love took his own life on my birthday over 20 years ago when he was just 23. I was abroad when it happened, and I only learned of it when I called his grandmother, having been unable to reach him the day after. Though I am happily married now with grown children, there are still moments after all these years I ponder why he chose to end his precious life, especially when he had nieces and nephews who admired and looked up to him. Can you help me understand these feelings? Is it guilt or is it something else?" So, this writer says when she was younger, about 20 years ago, she was in a relationship with a young man who was 23 at the time, and she was away for a period. And while she was away, he died by suicide or committed suicide on her birthday. I that's something that stood out for me quite a lot, that he did this on her birthday. Um, and she was trying to find him like the day after it was her birthday, and that's when he did this. Now, you will recall that I did say one of the things to understand when a person has that suicidal ideation, especially when it has moved from just having that thought to actually having a plan. The one thing that I did mention that I would like to remind us all is suicide is a very, very selfish act. I'm not saying they are bad people. I'm not saying he's a bad person. But to take your life knowing, in his case, it's your girlfriend's birthday, and she mentioned he had nieces and nephews, he had family that would obviously be very traumatized and hurt by the act, yet he did it anyway. Again, I'm not saying people who have died by suicide or even attempted suicide are bad people, but it is a selfish act, meaning they get to a point where they're not thinking about how it will impact other people anymore. Sometimes they are, in the sense that they want to hurt people, because sometimes people harm themselves as a way of punishing other people. That in itself is quite a narcissistic act. And we can talk about that at another time. But what I'm talking about is not narcissistic driven suicide or self harm, but when that person gets to a point where life doesn't make sense anymore, they don't want to live anymore, they're at the end of their rope and they decide to use that rope to end their life. So she's talking about, her question is, why does she still think about it? Why does she still have some of these feelings? And the thing is, for survivors, those who survive people that have um, ended their life through suicide, it doesn't end for those that are left behind. It doesn't end. I remember as a child, my first encounter with suicide was an elder at our church. And we grew up around this family. They would come to our house, would go to their house. We played with their kids. So they were, I would say, good family friends. And I think due to losing his money, his business, and what he thought anchored his position in society, because sometimes that's the problem. The way we value money and things and position, and when those things are taken away, then we feel like life is not worth it anymore. And it seems like there's nowhere to go, there's no recovery from it. So he ended his life via suicide. I think he shot himself, actually. It was quite violent in the family home. Now, when you look at his children who are now adults, their lives have not gone well. And by this, I mean, not that they haven't, like, economically, sure. Like, I think a few years later, the whole family immigrated to the US. So they had opportunities, they got educated or whatever. But you can tell their lifestyles, the choices some of them have made, this came out of the trauma of their father's suicide when they were young. A couple of the daughters became prostitutes, basically. That's what it is. The sons, I think one of them became a heavy drug user and alcoholic. And would they have ended up like that if their father hadn't taken his own life? Most likely not. But they did. Because trauma within families. That's why we talk about intergenerational, multi-generational, generational trauma. Like it can impact families for generations, the acts of that one person. So my point is, it becomes part of your history, part of your family's history. When somebody you're close to, you're intimate with, you have a relationship with, takes their own life. And part of the reason is there's always so many questions and no way to get answers. If someone dies due to, let's say, cancer, it's a slow process. You get to say your goodbyes. There's some degree of closure. Often with suicide, because they don't want people to stop them, they are not open about their plans. So you might think, and I've said this before, you might think everything is okay. Oh, so and so seemed more cheerful. Well, it seems like they're over their rough patch. And then 2 days later, you find out they're gone. They ended their life. You have so many questions that will never be answered. And in cases where it's your spouse or your child or your parent, there's always that, was I not enough? Or could I have done something different? Or you might have feelings of abandonment, feelings of resentment, feelings of anger. All of these are reasonable, normal, natural. And this woman is talking about, from time to time, she ponders. And to me, that means it's not always on her mind, but sometimes it does come to her mind and she wonders why he did it. And the thing is, we can look at a person's economic status, we can look at what's been going on for them and all of that, and draw our own conclusions, but we'll never actually know the real reason or the actual reason. Some will write a suicide note as a way of answering some of those questions, but even then, there's always going to be those questions. There are always going to be unresolved feelings. And that's why therapy is good in situations like this. You might be the survivor of somebody who took their own life. I really encourage you, if you have not, to go for therapy, because this is one space where your questions won't be answered, but you can process some of your own feelings and emotions around that death. And it's okay to be angry, to be hurt, to be all those things. But just like any other emotion, any other feeling, you don't let it take over your entire life. You don't let it stop you from living and moving on. This woman could have allowed that death to become the defining thing, because I've met people like that whose whole lives are now centered around somebody else's death, somebody else's suicide. And so they grieve forever. And that's not healthy, because you have to let go at some point. And letting go is not forgetting that person. Letting go doesn't mean they now mean less to you. Letting go is making peace with what happened and continuing a healthy life, a meaningful life for yourself. So, why does it come to mind from time to time? Is it guilt? And it might be guilt if, because you mentioned that you were studying abroad. So you had left this boyfriend somewhere, you were abroad. Did you say studying? No, you just said you were abroad. And he took his own life on your birthday. I don't know if you had an argument, maybe he didn't like you being away. I do wonder why it had to be on your birthday. Maybe there were other issues at hand. And why do you feel guilty? Is it because you were not there? Because you chose to go abroad? I don't know. But I'm really happy to know that you are happily married with grown children. So you did move on. You went on with your life, and there's nothing wrong, and it's completely okay from time to time to remember his precious life, as you put it. Okay, so we'll leave it there for this week. And I kind of want to start talking about comorbidities or multimorbidities. And what that means is comorbidities is when you have two illnesses, major illnesses that have lasted a year or longer, right? So uh, it could be you have depression and diabetes, you have chronic pain and anxiety, whatever it is. Comorbidities is any two illnesses or diseases within the period of about a year that are both causing significant impact on your life. Multimorbidities is two or even more, because some people can, and you find that as people age, this becomes a common factor. And it's important to talk about these things because they impact daily life. So imagine you have chronic pain. Chronic pain is not a mental health disorder or mental health disease, but it often does result in depression, in anxiety. I was speaking with a friend recently who has a chronic condition, and she was talking about being afraid to leave the house because what might happen when she's out and about on her daily life and tasks and activities, and she has some kind of attack. So now she barely leaves the house. She's, which indicates anxiety. So she has this chronic physical, let's say medical uh, disease. And because of it, she has developed pretty severe mental health illnesses as well. So, comorbidities can be two or more mental health illnesses, or it can be a physical health issue. So, you can have chronic pain, you can have diabetes in one person, that's a comorbidity. The fact is, you have two major illnesses that impact your life on a daily basis over the course of about a year. So, why is this important to know? Because going back to mental health, what sometimes happens is, and I've seen this a lot with clients, when they first come and see me, and I ask them, have you seen a psychiatrist or a physician? Do you have a formal diagnosis? It's important to understand, even if you've not seen a physician or a psychiatrist, but you suspect you have something, it's good to still go for therapy. You don't need a formal diagnosis to go for therapy. It is very helpful in that if you go to your therapist and they ask you that question and you say yes, the next question obviously is, what was the diagnosis? What did the doctor say is the issue or the problem, the disorder? And so often what you'll find from psychiatric reports is they kind of list them in order, usually of severity, and they will say, so for example, it might be mild depression with severe anxiety. So they'll say severe anxiety, mild depression underneath. And so what they will treat is the anxiety because it's more severe. It is seen as having a worse impact. It is seen as being more urgent. Let me put it that way. So you might be diagnosed with two or more conditions. It is common in mental health, especially depression and anxiety. It's common for people to have both. And sometimes it's really difficult to know which came first. You might have anxiety first, or maybe that's what you've identified first. And because you have like severe anxiety, you can't go out, you can't do this, you no longer have a social life, you keep having panic attacks, you are now questioning your ability to do anything. So you become depressed. So by the time you go and see a physician or a psychiatrist, both the anxiety and depression are significantly impacting your life. There are some conditions that develop in childhood, or maybe I'll put it this way, are most common in childhood. So, like ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and that often also comes with comorbidities like depression, like anxiety, like bipolar disorder, like substance use disorders, which includes alcoholism, and like personality disorders. Some years ago, when I first started in the field, I worked a lot with like elementary or primary aged children. So I'd say 12 and under. And I remember in one particular setting, I worked in a school for, it was mostly boys that had mental health challenges that made it difficult, if not impossible, for them to be in a mainstream classroom. And the most common condition in the room, and it was usually a very small number, like 9 or 10 students, because the teachers and everybody else couldn't handle more than that. So it was normally a small group, about 9. And within this setting, one of the things that we often would see, some of the boys had ADHD, some of them had, I remember one boy in particular had Tourette's syndrome. If you're not aware of what Tourette's is, it's that condition that comes with involuntary tics. So some of those tics can include just blurting things out. This boy in particular would blurt out obscene language. He wasn't doing it deliberately. He could also, uh, like, sometimes tics are more physical, like clapping, snapping their fingers, like, and it becomes something. We also had a boy that had OCD, which is obsessive compulsive disorder. So it was a group of boys that had different mental health disorders and couldn't function in a mainstream classroom. So they came to this school instead. And one of the things is most of them also had depression and anxiety because of that disorder. So, like the boy who had Tourette's, because he always got in trouble, and it took a while for, at his old school, even for his parents to understand that actually he has Tourette's syndrome. He's not deliberately being rude and offensive and trying to start anything. And so, because it took a while for people to understand that he had Tourette's, he was always getting in trouble. And the thing with Tourette's is they can't stop themselves. With treatment and time, and especially as they grow older and mature, they might get a handle of some of it, but not all. And so he was always getting in trouble. And so he became a very anxious person because he was always afraid, am I going to say or do something and get in trouble, offend someone, get into a fight because people think I'm doing. So he had severe anxiety because of the Tourette's syndrome. So that's an example of a comorbidity that developed because of one particularly challenging disorder that resulted in anxiety. You'll also find a lot of people with ADHD, because they're self medicating, and self medicating is when they take drugs, alcohol, to try and get some control over their ADHD. So maybe they've not been properly diagnosed and treated, or whatever it is. And by the time they do get access to healthcare, they've already started, whether it's marijuana, alcohol, cocaine, heroin. Some years ago, I worked with two brothers. They were actually brothers, siblings. Both of them had really, really bad ADHD. So it does tend to kind of run in families. A lot of these mental health disorders do. And I've said this before, some of it is biological, some of it is behavioral, like learned behavior. So these two brothers both had really, really bad ADHD and started using drugs very early in life. I think one was like 9 and the other was like 10. So very early in life. And by the time I started working with them as their therapist, they were in their 30s. So we were talking a couple of decades of self medicating using marijuana, cocaine, alcohol, whatever they could get their hands on. So now their comorbidities were ADHD and a substance use disorder. So whether it's the alcoholism or the drug addiction, that's a comorbidity. What did I treat? What did I focus on? Sometimes, as therapists, we have a little more leeway in that we can focus on both. Often in our healthcare system, especially here in Canada, what happens is when you go to your doctor, and let's say you have a broken arm, a broken leg, and a broken spine, your doctor here in Canada will tell you, pick one. I'm only treating one. So you now have to think about, okay, which one do I is really impacting my life the most? So you will say, oh, doctor, it's my spine. So the doctor will treat your spine. If you now want them to treat your broken arm, you make another appointment. If you want them to treat your broken leg, you make another appointment. Obviously, I'm exaggerating, but the point is, with our current medical system, doctors, physicians, our primary care physicians will often tell us, pick one. You can't go to your doctor and say, I have a stomach ache, I have a headache, and I think I have. They'll tell you, no, pick one. And you can imagine how challenging that is when there's comorbidities. So you're diagnosed with ADHD and a substance use disorder. Now you have to figure out which one is impacting my life the most. And that's very, very difficult for you to pinpoint as well as for a physician to pinpoint. And that's what complicates comorbidities. It's not as easy as, okay, we'll give you this medication for anxiety, this one is for depression, this one is for bipolar. It doesn't work that way. And sometimes you're treating the depression, but it's making the anxiety worse. Sometimes you're treating the anxiety, but it's making the depression symptoms worse. It happens. It's unfortunately, this is the reality and the truth that a lot of us don't understand. Medicine is not an exact science. Doctors diagnose by elimination, pretty much. You give them your symptoms, and based on that, they look for what is the most likely. And often they're right, but sometimes they're wrong. And they're not wrong because they're careless. Sometimes it's they don't have all the information that they need. So that's why I often will tell my clients, keep a journal of your symptoms, of your sleep, of even your diet, your intake, your appetite, all of these things. Because when you now go to the doctor and you want a more accurate diagnosis, and a more effective treatment, they need all the information they can get to come to the right decision on your treatment. So I've worked in medical clinics where someone will just tell the doctor, yes, my head is aching. And the doctor says, okay, but you can get Tylenol over the counter. And the doctor almost has to prod them for more information. Then they'll now reveal, I haven't been sleeping, I haven't been eating, I've been nose bleeding, blah, blah, blah. But if you keep a journal of these things, when you go to the doctor, you can then just let them know that these are the symptoms I've been experiencing over the last 2 weeks or whatever it is. So now I've come to the doctor. This is especially important if you've had some kind of ongoing health issues. If you've noticed this has been going on for a while, which is what we mean by chronic, right? When we say chronic, it's something that's ongoing, it's been happening for a long period of time. So you want to bring that information to your doctor. And it works the same way with your mental health treatment. And I've said this before, so if your physician or your psychiatrist puts you on medication, don't just take the medication and leave it at that. From the first day you're taking this medication, journal. You took this dose, 3 hours later you were feeling dizzy, write that down. Or you took this medication and you slept 15 hours and couldn't even lift your head off the pillow, write it down. Keep track of these things. And I've said this before and I'll keep saying it. If you're put on new medication for depression, anxiety, any kind of mental health disorder, make sure you go back to the doctor in 2 weeks' time, right? Follow up in 2 weeks. That is best and recommended practice. I know in some countries you pay for every doctor's appointment, you're paying for your medication. I get it, I understand it. So if you can't go 2 weeks after you start a new medication, if you can't go for a follow up, at least keep a journal. So when you do go, you have that information that 2 weeks after I started the medication, this is what was happening. 4 weeks later, this is what was happening. Your physician needs to know that, they need to understand that so that their care, their treatment can be effective. So, comorbidities. How do you know you have that? Sometimes what happens, like I said, you start off with one thing. So, let's say you have bipolar disorder, right? And it's been impacting your life, and as a result, you can't keep a job. Let's say your spouse left you, your kids don't like you, you have no social life, you've made so many enemies, da, 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 and you become depressed. You can often trace that it started off with this, and now I'm here. So the depression can be a symptom of bipolar disorder, but it can also be a standalone diagnosis, meaning you have that comorbidity. And so, again, this is why journaling is so, so useful. And a lot of us, when we think journaling, we're thinking sitting down, you have your little book and your pen, and you start off Dear Diary and all of that. That's not what journaling has to be. If you're inclined to do it that way, great. If not, sometimes I say to some of my clients, even on your phone, you can just on your calendar in your phone at the end of the day, just write a few words. Felt happy, cried a lot, didn't get any sleep, ate absolutely nothing, or I ate and I threw up. You're just putting it in your calendar. It's just a few words. It doesn't have to be an essay. But the point is you're keeping track. You are keeping track. One of the questions you will often be asked, because most mental health diagnosis, it has to have been over a certain period of time. So your physician or psychiatrist or whoever is diagnosing you will ask you, how long has this been going on? And if you've not been paying attention, you can't answer that question. So keeping that journal, keeping that, just those details, helps you to be able to answer those critical questions for your health. So something else that's important to understand about comorbidities or multiple morbidities, and I think I mentioned this, but I want us to talk about it a little bit more, is it does um, develop over time. It is more common as you get older. A lot of us are in what we're calling the sandwich generation. We are looking after our children, and now we're also looking after our parents. So we're right there in the middle. So you might find with your parents, they started off with one illness. Now they're in their late 60s, early 70s. They now have two or three. And the little pill box keeps getting bigger and longer. That is unfortunately part of aging, is multiple morbidities. And so we need to offer that grace to our older generations, our parents, our aunties and uncles, our neighbors, whoever. As they age, this is likely to happen. So they might require multiple medications. They might require multiple specialists involved in their healthcare. And you are part of that. If you are in the sandwich generation, you're looking after your parents, make sure you are keeping track of what medications, what specialists, who they're seeing, what they're seeing them for. I can't tell you how many times something critical happens and it's been building up over time, but the children of these elderly people don't pay attention. All of a sudden, your mother, your father is in the hospital and you're shocked, like, where did this come from? But it's been developing over time. So have those check-ins with them, like schedule check-ins with your parents. If you are a parental carer, if you're looking after your parent, and don't wait until they're in that position where they now need full-time care or whatever. Start early. If your parents are in their 50s, start talking to them about their health, because you need to know what's coming. Don't say, oh, when they're 70, 75, then I'll start paying attention. If you do that, you're going to be caught up in things you don't understand. You're not going to be able to offer the support that they need. And then it's going to stress you out and cause you some mental health issues. I've seen a few of my clients who are themselves in their 30s, 40s, 50s even, and they're looking after older parents, and they are stressed, they are anxious, they are depressed because they also have children that they're still looking after. They're trying to look after themselves, they have full-time jobs and all of that, and now they have ailing parents. So you're helping your parents, but you're also helping yourself by staying involved. I'm not saying take over their lives and start making decisions for them and treating them like they don't know anything, because I've seen that as well. Like really, really bossy children to their elderly parents, and which just makes things horrible and untenable and ruins relationships. What I'm saying is, with care and compassion and grace, and of course, love, understand your parents' health. If they mention, I went to the doctor, give them a couple of minutes to explain what they went for. Ask them what they need. Are they on new medications? Because I'm just, as I'm speaking, I'm recalling one particular case where one of my clients, she's in her late 40s, has become a caregiver for her elderly mother. And her mother had mentioned she went to the doctor. What the mother didn't mention and she didn't ask was the doctor gave her some new medication. And then there was a severe reaction to this medication. She ended up in hospital. Nobody could say that, oh, it's the new medication, because she was in a bad condition and her daughter had no idea. So it took longer than it should have to identify what was going on. Because when people are admitted to the hospital, they'll often be asked, are you on medication? And the hospital will carry on providing that medication. So even while she was reacting severely and couldn't say and articulate for herself that I am on new medication, they were still giving her that medication. So of course things were getting worse. But she had mentioned to her daughter that she went to a doctor for a checkup. She just didn't mention the new medication, and the daughter didn't ask. So ask some of these questions. Ask some of these questions. Write it down somewhere when you go visit them. Just and be honest. And I'm all for transparency and honesty. Just let them know that I just want to keep track, so that if anything ever happens, I know where to start. I want to keep track. Any new diagnosis, any new medication, who's your specialist that you see, who's your primary care physician, where do you go for care. We need to know those things about our elderly parents. That's part of that caregiving. And the more we equip ourselves with that knowledge, the less stressed we are when things happen, because we have answers to certain questions. So, comorbidities or multiple morbidities, including mental health, tend to increase with age. When we talk about mental health, this is where we start talking about conditions like Alzheimer's, dementia. There's something that we call, what's it called? Sundown syndrome. Now, a few years ago, I had an elderly client. She was about 75 years old. She lived alone. She was driving, all of that. And she was fine. Like, she could go grocery shopping, pay her bills, do all this in the morning. But by late afternoon, she becomes disoriented. She becomes confused. A few times she had car accidents. She'll turn on the cooker and forget, and things would burn. So there was a fire one time in her kitchen, but in the morning she's fine. And that's sundown syndrome. I think that's the correct word, which is a neurodegenerative condition. So this will sometimes lead to like dementia and all of that. I think, yeah, most times it leads to dementia and all, but it's the beginnings of something. And so it took a while because she lived on her own. She would come and see me by herself. No one was bringing her for therapy, but she ended up coming for therapy because the fire, so the firefighters were called, they put out the fire, and then she had a car accident, the police came. And so thankfully it's a kind of small community. So firefighters, police, people are like, she's had a few run-ins basically with firefighters and police. And in the end, they did what we call here in Canada a Form 1, which was they forced her to go to the hospital. At the hospital, they were then able to do a proper assessment and discovered this is what was going on. If you talk to her at 9 a.m., you would not identify any problem at all. And that had actually happened because she did go and see her physician. She went to see, but they were morning appointments, so no one could find anything wrong with her. but obviously something was wrong. And so it took her staying in the hospital for a few days for them to actually properly assess her and actually see that, okay, so this happens towards the end of the day. It's the sundown syndrome. It's neurodegenerative. And with time, it became more and more pronounced and stopped and not stopped. It started happening throughout the day and into the night. And sometimes what would happen was she'll do stuff at night, and in the morning should forget that she did it. So one of the things that she kept calling the police, like almost every day calling the police, because at night she'll do things around in her house, and then in the morning she's like, somebody's been in my house, they moved my shoes, they did this, they did that. So she calls the police. And she kept telling the police, somebody's coming into my house, something is wrong, nobody's protecting me, I live by myself. And she thought it was some guy, a handyman, that had come to fix something some months before. It wasn't him, it was her. But because of this condition, she was doing things at night, forgetting, and she was afraid in the morning when she'd wake up and her shoes are somewhere else and this thing has been moved, the door is open, and like nothing was ever missing. Things were just not where she remembered leaving them. So she would keep calling the police. So she had that condition. And because of all of that, she started getting really anxious. So when they diagnosed her with this, they also said there was anxiety. They also said there was depression. So that's an example of a mental health multimorbidity, where she had several conditions, and it might have been this one thing. And one of the things, I should mention this, one thing we know, and I think research has shown, and of course there's more and more research coming out, people who have struggled with chronic depression, severe depression, chronic depression, anxiety, chronic stress, so high levels of stress over long periods of time, are more vulnerable or at more risk for things like dementia, sundowners, and other conditions as they age. So you might, in your 40s or 50s, have depression, and then later on you now have dementia. It doesn't mean that depression has said, oh, okay, dementia is now here, I'm going to take my leave. It doesn't work that way. These conditions just pile up. And so people really end up struggling with what we're calling multi-morbidities or comorbidities. And we see this a lot more in our elderly. And it's happening on a mental level, it's happening on a physical level, it's happening on a social level. I had a coffee recently with a friend and acquaintance who is in her mid 70s, maybe. Yeah. And yeah, mid 70s or mid to late 70s. I know she's not yet 80, but she's at that point in life where she has started attending more and more funerals, more friends dying, more friends moving into assisted care, more friends spending lots more time in the hospital. And it's really impacting her mental health. So while she's still healthy and all of that, her mental health, because it's this almost continuous cycle of grieving. You just buried this friend, and then this one is gone. That friend is now in the hospital. So you're spending time in hospitals, in care homes, trying to stay connected with your friends, and your friendship circle is getting smaller and smaller, and you are getting less and less active and strong, and starting to worry about your own health as well. And so again, when we're talking about comorbidities, multi morbidities in older people, we really need to look at the whole picture. Yes, there's the disorder or the disease, but how is it impacting them as well? And that's why you might find that people start drinking a lot more in their old age because they're depressed, they're lonely, they're trying to self-medicate. So you might find that now they're also struggling with their use of alcohol, which in itself is a disorder. Like when it gets to a point where it's impacting their lives, they can't stop and control it, they're drinking for all the wrong reasons, that in itself becomes a disorder. So multiple morbidities are physical, are mental, are social. They become more and more socially isolated. It might be by choice. More often than not, it's not by choice. It's because they're losing their friends. It's because they don't feel confident enough to be out socializing because maybe they're sick, they're struggling with their health. They don't know, can I really handle a 2 hour drive to Toronto, or can I really handle whatever it is? So they're spending less and less time with friends, with family. So we do need to really think about our older generations and what they might be experiencing as they age. Chronic conditions, chronic pain, things like arthritis, things like diabetes, hypertension, high blood pressure, all of these things can impact their mental health. Like, I'm not a physician, so I'm not talking about these conditions like as a physician. I'm talking about these things and how these illnesses can lead to depression, anxiety, substance misuse. Um, it's not uncommon for older people, for example, like here in Canada. I remember some years ago when I was working at a clinic, a lot of our elderly people were becoming addicted to narcotics, Percocets and opioids and that. And they were getting them proper prescription. They'd come see the doctor. Doctor, I have back pain, and they'd get these drugs. And it's not that they didn't have pain, but they were also struggling with substance misuse. And so now, if the doctor says, I'm not giving you this medication anymore, they're experiencing severe withdrawal, that can come up with its own issues as well. So we were seeing a lot of elderly and older people actually becoming addicted to prescription medications. They needed them to cope. And it's not just pain they were trying to cope with. It's everything else that comes with that pain. It's everything else that comes with aging and social isolation and having to slow down. You can be as young as you want to be at heart, but if your body is struggling, you being young at heart can actually not be a good thing if you don't know how to cope with aging. So if you're somebody looking after an elderly parent, or you are foreseeing that in the next 5 years, 10 years, or whatever, I'm going to be the primary care giver for my father, for my mother, for my auntie, for my grandmother, whoever it is, pay attention now. Don't wait until then. Pay attention now and establish some good, healthy lifestyle patterns together. Why wait until they're 80 years old and infirm, then start saying, oh, I'll visit my grandmother every Friday? But right now you don't bother. Like that to me is negligence. So start it now. when they're still healthy and able to really enjoy your company, to do things with you, travel with them. I know some families will plan a vacation and forget they have parents who haven't been on vacation in 10 years, but you and your little family go on vacation every year. Look after your parents. And it starts by understanding where they are medically, physically, mentally as well. Have conversations. Understand even some of their fears and some of their anxieties around the future and aging. The other thing, obviously, is around money. If they will be able to afford long-term care, if that happens, hospice, if that happens, all of those things. Too many families are caught unawares because they're not having those critical conversations in time. You start wanting to ask about all that when they're in the hospital and the hospital is saying we need to discharge them to a long-term facility. Then now you're asking questions. But you need to plan for it now, have those conversations now, and establish healthy patterns now. Understand their health, understand where they're at, because these things are real. And as people get older, they're more likely to experience more health issues mentally, physically, socially, emotionally, all of that. And we also need to think about elderly abuse, that sometimes some of these ailments and stuff that's happening to them could be that they're experiencing abuse of some kind, especially when they're in long-term care facilities. Abuse happens there at really, really alarming rates. Negligence. I've known people whose parents were in those facilities from morning till night. No one comes to check on them. If they need, maybe they now use the adult diapers. Nobody's coming to change them, to check on them. They develop bed sores and all of that. But as soon as the staff in that facility hear that so and so's child is coming to see them, they'll come, they'll clean the room, they'll make it seem like they're always attentive, always there. But that's not the case. So if you can afford for other people to take care of your parent, still pay attention to what's happening in that environment. Still pay attention, because they could be experiencing really, really terrible things while you're assuming we're paying for it, so they're fine. I'll leave it there for this week. Remember, you can text 437-778-3299, or you can email infolovebay@gmail.com. If you are somebody who's looking after your elderly parents, please write in. Let us know how it's been going, how you've been coping, how they've been coping, how even your children, because in a lot of families, like even older children become part of the roster. I have a friend of mine who looked after her mom until she died, and she had 2 adult sons who would help as well. So the whole family really stepped up for that parent, and that was good. So share how your family is coping, how your parents are coping, any issues you've encountered. Would love to hear from you. 437-778-3299 or infolovebay@gmail.com. Have a lovely rest of the month of August. Today is August 20th. Our summer is almost over. We're moving into the fall season. And here in Toronto, in Ontario, anyway, it feels like fall came way, way too early. I hope that doesn't mean the winter is coming early as well. Oh my goodness. Take care of each other. Show each other love and compassion.